Well, ladies and gents, figured while I have a deer here, might as well make a video on how I skin, quarter, cut up, process, all that on deer. Now I'm going to have a bunch of different sections linked down the timeline if you're looking for anything specific, or if you're new to this process or just need a refresher, you can watch through the whole video. Also, make sure to leave me a like if you want to see more videos like this on your recommended page. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe. I do everything fishing and hunting related. Anyway, I'm gonna put my GoPro hat on. That way I'll give you two different angles, probably give you a better idea of what I'm up to. Now, first things first, first cut I make is around here, all the way around the legs. If you hang your deer by cutting through the Achilles and putting something through the legs, be very careful cutting around right here. It's happened to my friend, it's happened to me. If you cut through this while you're trying to hold on, the entire leg of this deer is gonna fall and that knife's gonna go right into your hand. That's not gonna feel good. So without severing the Achilles, I like to pinch and just get a little cut in there. Now it's pretty tough to pull away at this part, so I usually just end up cutting around the whole thing. Now both sides are severed right here, all the way around. I like to make two cuts on each leg going down the hips on this line. Once you get down to this fatty part where you have a female, it's going to be where the udders are. If you have a male, it's going to be where its nuts are. Kind of cut off this fat chunk, and you'll see right here, this will pull off pretty easy, but I like to get both sides done before I start pulling at that. Kind of cut around some of these stiffer parts, but once you get both of those sides cut off a little bit, that's when you can kind of set your knife down and work with this hide a little bit. Now, I find the easiest way to pull hide is grab the back of it, wrap your fingers around, and use the palm, the bottom of your palm, and just kind of work it around. Gives you a bit more torque on it. If you find a piece that's hung up, just grab your knife, pull on it a little bit, and then cut off that part that's hanging up like that. Kind of just continue to do this all the way around until you get down to the tail. Also, if you have meat that's starting to pull off with the skin, just make sure to cut that so you don't end up ripping off a whole chunk of meat. There's a part in here where the two hips meet. You'll see where the fur is coming down. You can cut right there to make it a bit easier to pull everything down to the tail. Like I said, rotating with the palm of your hand is very good, but if you can get a good chunk of this down here, you grab it, kind of make a fist, almost like punch it down. It's also a very good way to get a lot off. Now, once you have this all worked down to your tail, it's going to require just a little bit of cutting. You'll see where the hide's connected going into the tail. Cut that part off, and that is going to carry you all the way down to the tail, where I'll make a good incision right here. Just kind of pull at the tail and cut, and you can pull everything down behind the tail like so. You can see I have that gap right there. Tail's right here. Now you put your hand behind that gap, just pull straight down. There you go. Now your tail is pretty much off. You can either hacksaw this, or I'll take my knife, cut all the way around it. There is a bone right there, so it's pretty tough to cut all the way through. But if you get the meat and everything from around it, kind of just try and pop it. I like to twist it. You'll hear it pop. There's your tail. It comes right off. Make a little ponytail out of it. Now, going back to the actual hide, I'd say the tail is usually the toughest part, but that doesn't mean go ahead and rip everything off. Kind of want to take it easy. I like to cut the huge fat chunks off while I'm pulling everything. Tell you, man, if deer fat tasted good, these things would be gold mines. Now, if you like to save your brisket, I'd be very careful once you start pulling the hide along this, because there's really not much connecting the brisket to the body. It's more connected to the hide than it is the body. So usually I'll pull everything down from the back. Get it pretty even with where these ribs start. And then if you want, save this little slab of meat. It's really very minimal, but if you want to save it, kind of pinch it up against the hide while you're pulling. And then that way, this little sliver of meat doesn't pull away with the rest of the hide. Now, just keep pulling this all the way down to the legs. You gotta kind of work your way around the body, do it evenly. Pretty big wound I made. When you get to the point where you're getting to the top of where you cut during field dressing, you want to make sure both sides of the hide are coming down evenly, just so it doesn't keep ripping down and you have one chunk of hide down here instead of splitting it in two. Again, once you get to the bottom near the front legs, make sure you're cutting away any meat that's pulling off of the hide, because there's a good amount here and it can get hung up. If you just keep tearing, you might lose a little chunk of meat. You don't want to do that. Now once you get to these front legs, kind of start to dig your fingers under there. Maybe try and meet it on both sides. Keep pulling it down. You'll get to a point here where you can kind of just poke your finger through and meet the other side. Now, once you get to that point where you're pretty far under that front leg, get your knife, find out where your hide is going to come through. So if you poke your hand down in here, put your other hand underneath here. You already see my finger coming out right here. But you want to take your knife, poke it through right where your finger is right there. And from there, what I like to do is kind of imagine the opposite of what we did up here. I'm going to do that in the reverse order. So I'll cut the hide going down this way in one good strip. You can sever that top part so it's a little easier to work with these legs. I like to cut these all the way down to almost the knee joint, maybe a little above it. Kind of cut this away. Keep working at both sides of that leg. Just keep pulling away at that, and eventually you can see my thumb poke through down here, and I still have some of that hide to go. So just right where your thumb poked through, put your knife there, cut that hide off. After you get that, you can kind of just work that straight off the leg here. And that'll meet up with the sternum hide up this way. But gotta do it on both sides first. Now, once you got that off the front legs, you start to work that hide all the way down to the neck. This is gonna take a bit longer than the first part just because there's so much connective stuff down here. Pretty tough to just yank off, so might need to cut more than you're yanking. Now if you do end up ripping a chunk of meat off of your hide while you're doing it, just cut it off. Oop. Put that in a safe place. I have a table over here. Now, once you're far enough up in here, satisfied with how far up this neck you've gotten, I like to find where this sternum part was and then cut from the neck and go all the way down in there. Cut all the way down this part, and that'll give you some room to work, and you can cut all the way up to where the base of the head starts on the inside of the hide. Now, once you're to this point, you kind of see the heads right there. Not a ton more meat you're gonna get up off this, so just cut straight into the neck right here. Separate everything. And just like the tail, takes a bit more pressure, but just twist the head. Make sure this knife isn't in the way. Almost had it. There you go. Break that neck right off. Cut the rest of that meat. There you go. It's your whole hide off, the head attached to it. Now, this is a good time to wash everything off of your hands. Now, once you get to this point, this is when I start quartering and cutting all the good chunks or splitting up all the meat, whatever it is. But I like to go from the bottom up. That way you aren't starting with the hind and then you have to deal with hanging the deer back up again or whatever. But yeah, first I'll get both the hind legs off. Kind of open up the deer, you'll see sort of where the connecting tissues are. Cut that chunk off there. Follow this straight up. You just keep pushing pressure going to the outside of the deer. It'll open up, make it pretty easy to see what line you should be following when you're cutting this. Actually, my arrow popped this joint, so it did a good amount of the hard work for me. Kind of feel the inside of it go around that bone and joints. That came right off. It's gonna be a little harder on the other side, but this side came pretty easy because I popped that entire shoulder off when I shot it. Now I'll do this other side. Also, if you see any chunks of hair, just cut them off, throw them in whatever trash you got. Easier to deal with it while the whole thing's hanging instead of having to deal with it when you're grinding it up. But same thing, press it out. Be careful, don't be a dummy like I'm doing and cutting towards my hand, but same thing, just follow that same line. You kind of just feel the inside of the shoulder. You'll be able to feel that bone that runs up in there. All you're really trying to do here is get under that bone. You can feel it on this side too. You want to get under that bone right where it starts and disconnect that whole front part. You can see here, that's the bone. Really, you don't really want to do what I did here. You want to just follow the bottom of this bone. See right there, that's part of your neck muscle. That should give you a good idea. I mean, it comes off just like this. There's no joints you need to pop or anything for the front end. Just kind of cut around the shoulder blade. Just like that, comes right off. Now, got your 2 front shoulders here, front legs. Some things I like to have ready, obviously, have a good and sharp knife to be able to cut through all this. I like to have a jerky / grind pile, or bowl, I should say. That way if I'm cutting stuff off and it's like a tough chunk of meat, or maybe it's just a small chunk of meat I'm cutting off and I don't want to throw it out, throw it in the grind pile. And that way you just have a big bowl of burger you can ground up later. From the front shoulders, there's nothing super important to save. And when I say save throughout this video, I mean like save for pan cooking or roast or whatnot. Not save like it's not good meat. Everything's good meat on a deer. But as far as the front legs goes, you got your shoulder and you got your shank. Pretty much all of this, what I'm about to cut off, I'll save the strips that don't have silver skin or ligaments or anything. The clean strips I'll save for jerky or for crock pots. But everything else is kind of a small strip. Just cut off of it, put it in the grind bowl. This is also good if you want to cut a good chunk of meat off and just throw it in a crock pot. That's good as long as you're taking off all the fat from it. Now the easiest way to go about this is, while it's all in one chunk, find any silver skin or big chunks of fat and cut them off right here. It's easier to do it now rather than when you have a bunch of little tiny pieces. Now you'll see on this shoulder blade with it facing up towards you, you have this bone right here. You'll see it through the meat even, you can feel it, that little white line going up. You have this one big muscle right here with the bone coming along the bottom. I'll cut right along that bone right here. Pretty easy just to follow it all the way up. Can sever it up here where that bone still exists. Cut right along the bottom here. Just disconnect that from what's left of this bone running down. Then cut along the back. Get this whole chunk of meat right off. That is a decent chunk of meat. This I like to strip up, and that goes to jerky. Now what I do when I have a chunk of meat that I'm not just gonna throw in a grind bowl, clean that up a little. Once you have a majority of that silver skin and sinew taken off, put that in your bag. This is gonna be my jerky bag. So I'll just put the bigger chunks of meat in there and then I'll strip it up later. Other side, just follow the bone again. Kind of the same thing. You wanna come right up along the bottom of this bone, kind of just run your knife along the bottom while you peel it up. Whenever you get up to this part, you'll see this bone ends right here. Kind of just plop your knife right through this, cut up the side, get all that off. Do the same thing, go down the bottom. You can separate out these chunks if you'd like. And I'll cut this off right about here where it comes and connects. That's another chunk you can save for jerky. The only thing, you can see this line right here. That's a strip of silver skin. You also got the silver skin on top. So I'll cut this off now. And then when I'm actually going to do my jerky, I'll pretty much cut this in half right along the silver skin line. Then you just kind of don't really need to deal with it. Next chunk I take off is this piece right here below that hunk you just cut. Find that bone still runs a bit in there. You got a ligament. At this point, kind of just cut this whole chunk of meat off. That's what I do at least. And in this chunk that you just cut off, you'll find there's a little line right down here. You kind of almost peel it away with your fingers. A few things you gotta cut. But you'll find there's 2 good chunks of meat in there. This kind of extra meat I'll just throw in the grind pile, but you got that one nice slab and that other part that you can rip right off. This type of stuff, I pretty much just use it for jerky, but if you want to throw this into a crock pot, make a stew out of it, anything that's low and slow, that's what this type of meat is good for. Only thing you need to do at the moment, if you're saving the whole chunk, is just clean up that fat and silver skin. Then you can just throw it right in your bag and you'll be done with that. Now once you have that all cut up, the rest of the meat that's really on here just goes into my grind pile. There's a lot of ligaments running through it, a lot of silver skin, tons of nonsense that I just don't really want to deal with cutting off, so I throw that all in the bowl. That's pretty much what you want it to look like. Almost no meat left. All bones. And this can go into your sled or whatever garbage you have. Now, do the same thing with the next chunk of meat. I'm not going to show it because it's the same exact thing I just described. Then we'll move on to the torso. Now at this point, I'm going to disconnect the torso from the hips. This is kind of the same process as the front shoulders. All you really want to do is follow this line going down the hips. Now I like to cut this meat right here on the hips off. Go straight down, do the same thing on this side. I'm just gonna cut some of this fat off so I can see through the back. Now this is a good time while you're cutting this open, get your inner loins. Mine are pretty messed up because of the shot I made, but these are super tender, great in the pan. They're these chunks right on the top, connected to the inside of the spine. See if I can show them to you a little better. You can kind of run your fingers along them and they'll like pretty much fall right off. They're super tender, but just cut along the inside of that spine. See, like I'm not even cutting, just pulling it off. This is probably the smallest but the most tender part of the meat. Not big, kind of like a little sliver, but definitely a good thing to set aside. There's number 2. Now the part to make this more manageable, I like to cut most of that brisket off. That is connected to this rib cage, just makes it easier to work with, a little lighter. All you really need to do is cut all the way down until you feel a rib and then come out to the side. like so. That, if you want to dig through it, which I will probably do, is good for a grind pile, but it's kind of a lot of work there because there's a ton of just fat mixed in with ligaments and silver skin. It's a lot of stuff you need to cut through to get to the meat. This fat on the back is pretty easy to get off while it's hanging, so might as well go and do that if you have a good amount of it. Some deer, honestly, don't have much back fat at all. This one was on a frickin' bulk or something. This is one of the heaviest deer I've seen. I mean, just look at that strip of fat. Now here you can either choose to cut your back straps off now while it's hanging, or remove the torso, get it on your table, and then cut it up. I'm gonna choose to do it now just because it's already here. It's gonna make it lighter, easier to move the whole chunk. Unfortunately, my shot went right through up into its neck right here, so I lost a good chunk of this tenderloin, but the other side's good, so I'll be able to show you the whole part of that. Once you remove that fat cap I just did off of these ribs, it's pretty easy to get back into this loin. You can almost run your hand along this like I'm doing. Disconnect a lot of that stuff. Then come in right next to the spine, cut that hunk off. Go up this way. Now, you want to continue this up into the neck as much as you can. A lot of people will kind of cut it around where the neck starts to curve up, but you'll find it's not a ton, but still a bit of tenderloin left up into this neck cavity. Still going in here. Stops about right here. That's where it stops. You can kind of feel it and just pull it out. Now you'll feel the bone up here where this tenderloin ends. Right around there. Pretty good strip. This is all good meat that you can put in a pan, cut up for steaks. This is what you pay that top dollar for at restaurants. You get that beef tenderloin. Well, this is venison tenderloin. Now you do the same thing the other side. Cut right down that spine, just little by little. And eventually you can get your hand right under it. And you can work it right off the bottom. Now again, this goes down into the neck, but as you can see, my shot went pretty deep in there. And there's that other one. Not as pretty, a little shot up, but still delicious. Now for you people who are new to this, wherever you shoot your deer, that meat is not really salvageable. It's what you call bloodshot meat. And that is just not gonna taste very good. It's better to just throw that out. Maybe use it as coyote bait or something. You can find a use for it, but not the best for you to actually eat. So from here, I'm gonna cut down the middle of these legs. Then you'll be able to find a joint coming up this way if you just follow one of these bones. What? So we kind of come up on this hip, start cutting across right on this bottom ham right here. This might be a little weird first time you do it, but eventually connecting the hip to this spinal column in the bottom over here, you will find a joint. If you can kind of manipulate this leg so this joint gives you a gap right here, get under there and pop the ligament that's in there. Be careful though, because when this thing pops, it might come flying. You can can see it's starting to come. Once you pop that, you kind of just cut around the back of this hip. Might be easier. Come around to this side, follow the spine up right here, cut all the way up. And then from there, you can pair up where you just cut, poke your knife through, and cut the rest of that the whole way down. There's a little bone right here you got to get around on the hip, but it's kind of 2-at-1. You get the middle section off of the hind quarter and you separate the hind quarter. So you got to do that for the other side, but keep in mind when you do separate this other side, it's going to be a lot of weight pulling down on this torso, and also everything's going to be falling off of it. Now, just like last time, cut around some of these bones. You can be a little messy here with the cuts. I usually don't do anything fancy. Just kind of get that meat off. Now we got our ball joint exposed right here. All you need to do is kind of twist this a bit. I'll expose that for you. That was a joint on the side closest to you. Kind of hard to work in there. It's almost like popping an oyster shell. Got to find the right angle. There we go. Cut that front one. Get that part in the back. There we go. I think I got it. Now, just got to cut the meat off. Now you can see there's very little hanging on here, so once you get to this point, just kind of pull it away, cut that joint and hold on because that's falling off. Now, middle section goes on the table. There you go. Now you can see I got this whole big chunk of meat and my tenderloin. So I'm going to start with the loins first. This is the jerky bag, which I'm going to put on the steps right here. Take out another bag, get this prepared. Now, just take one loin at a time. Got the 2 inside loins, 2 outside loins. Now this is all one strip of silver skin going down here. I'm gonna take this extra sinew off so I can get a better look. Just wanna poke your knife under this in the beginning of where that silver skin is. Come out the back just a bit. And you can start cutting this all the way down. Just got to follow this the whole way. If you just take your time, use very light knife pressure while you're removing the silver skin. Keep your knife pretty straight at an angle and just pull up on the silver skin. You'll find that you're not taking as much as a good meat off and getting just that silver skin. I'm gonna need to do that a few more times because I didn't get it all in one swoop. I think it's better to have to come back and clean it up rather than taking off a big chunk of meat while you're doing it all at once. Now this is pretty good for a strip right here. You don't need to be Pablo Picasso trying to clean all this stuff up, make it look perfect. Just gotta do enough. I'm gonna cut this strip off back here, unfortunately, because this is all bloodshot. But might be able to pull a little more off this. But at this point, I like to get all this sinew off, especially if it's bloody. Once you got your strip looking pretty clean, I like to just cut it into big cubes. I'm gonna get this strip off real quick. Yeah, I like to just cut it into big cubes, kind of like this. And you can see inside of your loin, it's just meat, nothing else but red meat. I'll chuck all this in my bag. Then you can do the same thing with the other tenderloin and your inside loins. They might need a little more cleaning if you're like me and tend to leave them out by accident. But same process, just on a smaller scale. Just make sure any of this really bloodied up stuff gets cut off. Now, with this whole kind of middle part of the deer, it's gonna be the same situation with the front legs. It's gonna be good for stew, crock pot, slow cooking, burger, jerky, not necessarily really pan frying. If you want to, you can cut off some of these ribs and slow cook the ribs on a grill or something. I've done that before, it's pretty good. But pretty much what I do now is just put all of this meat that's on here in the grind pile, because really most of it is just thin meat, good amount of fat and like sinew tissue mixed into it. So personally, I think it's best for burger. Now, once you got all this cleaned up, you can see you want to flip your hind quarter so the outside of the leg is facing up towards you. You're going to see this little flap comes down, connects right here. This is pretty much all that's holding it on. Run your finger right up there, pretty much disconnect most of this. Cut a few pieces. And down here, got your ligament. Don't want to cut that, just be careful doing it. Now, got this whole piece. So this chunk right here, it's gonna be your bottom round. Bottom round is gonna be best for slow cooking. You can even put it in your burger, whatever the hell you wanna do with it. Low and slow though. Next, it's gonna be this chunky piece right here. Actually, first, before that, I'm gonna cut this off. This extra meat you cut off, throw it into some burger. Now we'll get to cutting off this big round piece. Just gonna want to follow these little muscle lines and kind of stick your fingers through them and tear it apart a bit. Just like that. All you really need to do is follow this line, cut along it, try not to dig into the meat next to it. Just keep flipping it back and forth. Keep cutting down. Eventually you're gonna hit this bone. And you're gonna wanna just slice all the way along it. Now eventually you're gonna see your cut on the other side of this. You can just follow this up. It'll usually pull all the way apart. And if you just pull this away from the bone and slice, don't dig too much into the meat next to it. That is gonna come off beautifully. And at this point, I like to take advantage of this still being attached. Just slice this part off, and that is going to be your sirloin. Now this I've tried a couple different ways. People say that's best in a crock pot. I do agree, great in a crock pot, but if you want some extra pan fry, that's going to be your cut of meat to do it. It's not going to be the most tender, not as good as your top round or tenderloins, but I still think that's a pretty decent meat to cut pretty thin, throw in a pan. Now, next one. It's gonna be right under this flap of meat. Gonna wanna just pull this extra stuff off, cut it. There we go. That goes in the burger. Now, what I'm holding here is your top round. This, other than the tenderloin, is gonna be your money cut. Now you wanna make sure you're only getting the top round and not any of the extra meat around it. You can tell if it's extra meat because it's not directly connected by meat, it's connected by that little thin sinew stuff. So you can just cut that extra stuff off that's around it. That is going to burger. Now back to the top round. It's gonna be just on the opposite side of this bone than your sirloin was, so kind of the same process. You can almost rip it off the bone with just your hands because it's pretty tender. Make sure you disconnect it from all the stuff below. You only want that top round, nothing else. You can flip your whole leg over, get a different angle at it. Bang. That's your top round right there. You can see it's a very clean piece of meat on the inside. No tissues, anything running through it. Very good, cut up into steaks. I typically don't make my deer steaks very thick. I like to cut them thin just because deer's inherently pretty dry. It's not a lot of fat in the actual meat, and the fat that is on the deer doesn't taste good at all. So I like to keep it thin, cook it high and fast when I'm doing steaks. That keeps the meat pretty tender and juicy. But other than cleaning this up for burger, the last thing you want to do off of your hind quarter, take the shank meat off, which is just going to be both sides of the bottom of this leg, this little calf muscle, and right in front of the shin. Now I like to cut this right above where this ligament is very thick. Also clean any of this excess stuff off. Just cutting right along that other cut of meat right there. Then same as the bottom, right where this main tendon connects to the top, I'll cut it right there. This can fool you. Looks like a nice little cut of meat, but if you look right in the middle of it, it's just like a maze of tendons and nonsense. Just not stuff you want to deal with when you're just trying to have a nice steak. Now, same thing down here, just clean up all the extra stuff. Also, while you're at it, feel free to cut some of the stuff off the bone that you may have left. That goes in my burger pile. Now this is pretty simple, just cut above these tendons, go right along the meat, don't cut yourself. There's one more tendon inside here that's hidden. You can kind of go a little further down and then keep your hands out of the way, pop that straight up through. I'll just kind of rip that out. Cut it down here before I get to the hide, bang. Have fun in the burger pile. Pretty much same thing over here. Cut it right above this tendon, go all the way down. Make sure you get that extra chunk of meat with it. Cut that off. Cut this off. Bang. Don't really need to be neat down here because it's going to get ground up anyway. There you go. That's pretty much it for that hind quarter. Then all you need to do is do the same thing on the other hind quarter. And yeah, that's your whole deer. If you do all the cleaning while you're kind of cutting everything up already, then you don't need to do extra work when you're inside and cleaning everything up. That's why I like to take all the fat and sinew and silver skin, everything off it as I'm cutting it up, because then I can just be done and I don't need to worry about cleaning up all the meat after. All I do after this is just take care of my grind bowl. I don't even add anything into it. I just put it as it is into the grinder, just straight venison. Typically, I'm not actually making burgers out of it or sausage. If you want burgers or sausage, you can season it a bit, put in some pork fat or something. That'll make a more like juicy, fatty, tender burger. But what I end up doing with most of this is either cooking in a pan and having it with some eggs or something, or just making chili out of my ground meat. So I just do it as it is. I don't add anything into it. But that's it. That's your whole deer. Now, if you guys found this video useful, I'd appreciate if you left a like. Helps me out. It'll also make more videos like this pop up on your recommendation page. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe. Currently, I'm posting a ton of deer season videos, but I do fishing, ducks, pheasants, anything involving fishing and hunting, really. But thank you guys again for watching today's video, and I'll see you on the next one.